Today we'll be looking at a new piece called Chuckwagon that's very much in a Western style, something you might have heard in one of those old Western movies. When I was a kid, my dog Major, who was this little wire hair fox terrier, he loved this particular commercial, the Chuckwagon dog food commercial. And in that commercial, there was a little team of horses and a covered wagon and driver, and it would run across the screen, and the dogs in the commercial would then chase that. Well, my dog also would chase it. He would bark at the TV, and my mom had this little black and white 13-inch TV on a dinner tray at the end of her bed. So when the covered wagon would go off the edge of the screen, he would jump down onto the floor and look for it, and then jump back up on the bed and bark. And as a kid, I just thought that was the greatest thing ever. So I wanted to write this very upbeat Western piece based on that. So let's take a look at it. Thinking about what this piece might sound like, a lot of influences started to flood in. The Westerns that my dad would watch when I was a kid, the scores to those, the more modern scores to Western movies, especially Bruce Broughton's Silverado, an incredible score. And if you haven't heard that score, listen to it. It's amazing. Also, Americana sounds, the sounds of composers like Aaron Copland, and especially his hoedown from Rodeo. You'll hear some of that in this piece. Another influence was bluegrass music. I think about those bluegrass fiddle tunes, and a lot of that sound to me is associated with that Western sound. So I started with this kind of offbeat rhythm. This rhythm that I hear in Westerns. Let's just listen to this intro right here, and I'll play through part of the A section here, and we can just hear what this rhythm sounds like. You can hear that Western feel, especially in the first two bars where it's got the sense of a horse trotting. The syncopation throughout these 6 measures is what I like to call a hitch in the giddy-up. It throws it off balance a little bit, but adds excitement to the motion of these chords. Now to write a melody over this, I'm going to try to think very much in the same manner that a bluegrass player might think if they were to improvise over these chords. In typical bluegrass, you would have what they call the cowboy chords, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord, these 3 major triads. And over these, you could play their major pentatonic scales. So over the C chord, you could play the C major pentatonic scale. And taking it further, you could add in the flat third, the E flat to that scale, making it what's known as a major blues scale. That sounds like this. So over each of the typical chords in a bluegrass progression, you could play the associated blues scale. So here we could play that major blues scale, the C major blues scale. Over the F, we could play the F major blues scale. And over the G, we could play the G major blues scale. Now there are other scales you can use, but this is how I'm thinking of constructing this melody. So if we look here at our melody in the first bar, you can see that we have all notes from that C major blues scale. But there are 2 borrowed chords in this first measure that come from the C parallel minor, this flat 3, the E flat major chord, and this B flat major chord, the flat 7 major chord. I'm still using the C major blues scale over these 2 chords, and I'm just making it work. So this G would come from the E flat major blues scale if we're using it, but the A wouldn't work. That comes from our C major blues scale. This goes by very quickly, and I think by keeping it in the C major blues scale, it helps pull it together. You could consider this D coming from a B-flat major blues scale or a B-flat pentatonic scale, but I'm considering this entire portion of the melody as coming from the C major blues scale, and then choosing notes from that scale that work over these two borrowed chords. Moving into the second bar, we have our C major blues scale again. We've got our C, D, our E flat, that's our flat third, our blue note going up to the third, the E. All of this is C major blues until we get to this A flat. This A flat comes from the F major blues scale. Since we are now on the 4 chord, the F major chord, I'm using the F major blues scale, and this is that flat third, that blue note going from the flat 3 up to the 3, the A natural. Let's listen to the melody in these 4 bars and listen for those blue notes and that bluegrass influence. So you can hear how this melody really has that Western spirit. It has the bluegrass influences to it. It's got the influences of Aaron Copland's hoedown. It really does fit this style. Now let's listen to the first 12 bars, which were all written with this same idea of using this major blues scale or the major pentatonic scale against these chords. Before we move on to listening to the orchestration of this piece, let's look at this short section here, which seems like it has some very intense chord symbols, but what they really are just the same chords we've been using with some added tensions, and they're voiced in a way that I know will sound good for brass. So we've got these fourth voicings on the top here, we've got some upper structure triads, and as I work on this section in the orchestration, I'll refine that even more. The one chord that looks unusual here, or that we haven't come across so far, is this D flat sus2 with the sharp 11. And that, again, is a borrowed chord, this time from the subdominant minor. All right, let's listen to this section and imagine it voiced into the brass as a big, exciting moment in the piece. All right, now that we've seen how this piece is constructed, let's take a listen to the full orchestration and then we'll come back and break it down. Well, that's a lot of fun. That brings me back to those moments with my dog chasing that little chuck wagon, and it really does capture that Western feel of the whole moment. All right, let's break down some of this orchestration. I started by taking the piano accompaniment and putting it into the brass in this opening. And one important feature that I added to this was this wood block. Now, the wood block is often used to represent a horse trotting. You'll find that in hoedown and many Western pieces. And I've done the same thing here. Let's just listen to that pattern. Now that little rhythm works with our pattern that we've put in the brasses, and this originally came from the piano sketch. Let's listen to the brass and this wood block all together. That really gives it a sense of a trotting horse and sets us up from the very beginning to have a Western feel. Now let's take a look at how I've orchestrated the melody into the strings. You can see that I don't have a lot of phrase markings here. The only slurs I have are these grace notes. That will help give it a little bit more of the fiddle sound that I'm after. Another way to get that type of sound is by notating certain notes to be played on their open strings. On the violin, the open strings are G, D, A, and E. So in this pattern, I could put a small 0 over this A, which would mean to play it on an open string, or on this E. And that'll help give it a little bit more of that fiddle sound. Another thing I could do to accentuate the idiomatic style of fiddle playing would be to use certain bowing techniques that a fiddle player might use. There's a pattern called hokum bowing, which is very common in bluegrass music and would be something that I would explore if I were to develop this piece. And I think I will. I'm really liking how this piece is coming out. Finally, let's take a look at the section from our piano sketch that I said would sound great in brass, and I have put it in brass here. A lot of times when you're sketching or composing your sketch, you're imagining what instruments might take what parts. Sometimes that only happens in the orchestration, but here I knew the brass was going to take this part, so it influenced how I voiced it in the piano. I picked voicings that I knew would sound good in brass. In the early days when I was composing with just piano and pencil and paper, I had to imagine what these things would sound like played by real players. And until those real players performed them, I wouldn't know exactly what it was going to be. I would have to imagine it. And that kind of training is something I think is really powerful. You should do that where when you're sketching, really imagine how those instruments are going to sound and then test them out. Now with modern notation, we can do that. Things like having Dorico and Note Performer here, I can get a pretty good approximation of what this would sound like with real players. Let's listen to just the 4 trumpets here playing this. And you can see I started with this voicing in fourths here in the trumpets. We've got 2 playing the melody, the trumpet 1 and trumpet 2 playing the melody. Then we go down a fourth and another fourth here in trumpet 2 to get this voicing. The next voicing is a triad voiced in an inversion. So let's just listen to how these voicings sound in just the trumpets. So for me, being a trumpet player, this sound is a sound I've heard many, many times, and it really does sound how I imagined it would as I was orchestrating this and as I was doing the sketch with the piano. All right, let's listen to all the brass now. You can see that we've got our French horn here up near its higher register, so there's some excitement. Same thing with the trumpet. They can certainly play higher, but this is a good, powerful range for them. Let's hear all of our brass playing this section. All right, I think it's time that we just listen to the whole piece now again, now that we've broken down some of this. I hope some of these ideas were helpful for you, and I've had a lot of fun writing in this style. The Western style is just iconic, and I hope that you'll give it a try. See you all next time. And now, Chuck Wagon for my dog Major.